Bring it. Or, boy, maybe I'll do better after the recess, starting on time. I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a reconvened public hearing or public roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. Today is Wednesday, September 6, 2023. The time is 1:24 in the afternoon. And I am in room 412 of the Johnny Wilson Building. This hearing is partly in person and partly virtual, and is available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. That's www.dccouncil.gov. The subject of this hearing is DC Public Schools food services contracts. This hearing was originally scheduled for August 22nd. That's a week or two ago, and we recessed that hearing to today. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony with regard to the food service contracts for the school year beginning this fall, actually beginning last week in DCPS since 2016. DCPS's food service contracts have been with two vendors, Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen. The contracts were put out for bid a year ago. That solicitation was canceled. They were put out for bid again last fall. And we are still waiting for those contracts to come to the council. As I noted, these are contracts for food service for school year 23-24. And I'm assuming there will be option years for the subsequent school years, but since we don't have the contracts, I don't know. And the school year began last week. So right now, as I understand it, DCPS is working with what it calls bridge contracts that are through September 30th. And we were told that we would be getting the new contracts before now. I know that we will not have them today. Well, we don't have them today. And I have asked that DCPS be present to explain when we will get the contracts. But this hearing is also an opportunity for others to testify. And ultimately what this is about, besides just the issue of procurement of the contracts, is food service. And that includes the quality of food service in our schools. We do know that there is a high correlation between students' ability to learn and the quality of the food that they get. And that for some children, the food that they get through DCPS, that is that they get in school, is perhaps the primary source of their nutrition in their lives. So it's important both for educational purposes as well as the quality of life for some of our students. That's why food service is important, and the quality of food. And also we know that the federal government requires, but also its district government, just a District of Columbia law, that the food that's served in our schools has to be of a high nutritional quality. So this is an opportunity to hear testimony about this, as well as the procurement. And I will be asking questions of DCPS with regard to when we'll be getting the contracts. Assuming that I don't recess today's hearing, the record for this hearing will close at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, September 20th. That's 2 weeks from today. We have 5 witnesses before we get to the government, and I believe 3 of them are participating virtually. But before I call them, I'm going to recognize my colleague, Councilmember Matt Fruman, in case he has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. As you laid out, obviously, food service is a critically important function, critically important for the nutrition of our children, for their ability to learn. Many of our children get most of their nutrition at school. So this is urgent that we get it right. I think that everyone would agree that from 10,000 feet watching as this contract has been extended and extended and extended and not submitted to the council, that this isn't the way we would want it to be done. There's something here that even if people are trying their hardest to do it, and even if it is something that is very complicated, there's something here we need to fix so that we can get this right and fully serve our children and do so in a way that is economically efficient and also builds the capacity of our local food service vendors so the district can grow in all different kinds of ways. So I am relatively new to this issue, but I do think it is a really important one. And I have the expectation that I will be digging in a lot on the issues around food service. And today becomes an opportunity for an education for me. And I will be very focused on how can we make this work better going forward so that we don't have to have a hearing like this again next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. So I'm going to call the first three witnesses who I believe are participating virtually. Gustavo Cardozo Rosales, who's a student at Columbia Heights Education Campus, and Yedidia Nadu, who is also a student at Columbia Heights Education Campus, and Alexander Moore, who is the Chief Development Officer at DC Central Kitchen. So let me, I see Mr. Nadu. Is Gustavo Rosales with you?
No, not currently.
Okay, so then you may be the only representative from
Yeah.
Czech, but why don't you proceed and good afternoon and speak a little louder if you could.
Okay. My name is Yedidia Nadu. I'm from Czech, and I will be talking about the food equity. So food equity incentive is at Columbia Heights Educational Campus starts with in a survey in June 2022. It asked students all about the cafeteria food, and the results showed 60% of the students that participated in the survey thought the food tasted and looked terrible. Over the 2022 to 2023 school year, students worked on with staff and Sodexo to improve food quality and choices at schools at Czech's diverse student body. So I believe, since working with Sodexo, that the food did improve at least a little bit, but students still to this day don't find the food very enjoyable. It doesn't really taste too good. Well, it didn't really improve all too much. I also believe that students should still have a more diverse palette. Like they should still get more food because we come from all different kind of backgrounds. And I really think that's important, especially for the student. Like more vegan options, because some students start fasting in like different ways. And Sodexo also realized while working with them, we have to be very patient because they said they're gonna add like new food, and it took them time, and then we would have to like keep talking to them over and over and over until they would have to add the new food. So that's my that was a concern of mine as well. But basically we had to be very persistent with Sodexo, and the food of it still didn't taste too good, but it was a lot better. Like the cheese sticks, some of the new stuff they brought on, but a lot of students still don't like the food. Like they're more willing to eat it now, but they still don't really like the taste of it. I know the percentage from 60% rose like around like 20%, but I know students still don't like the food.
That concludes your statement.
Yes, that concludes my statement.
Thank you. I may have questions for you in a minute, so don't go anywhere. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson and members of the council. We appreciate your convening of this important discussion on the City of DC Public Schools food service contracts. My name is Alex Moore, and I'm testifying on behalf of DC Central Kitchen. Since 2010, DC Central Kitchen has proudly served scratch-cooked, locally sourced meals as a DCPS food service provider. Our approach to farm-to-school programming includes purchasing ingredients from 60 local farms and food hubs, employing graduates of our culinary job training program for previously unemployed district residents at living wages with industry-leading benefits, and engaging with students to imagine and serve healthful, delicious, and culturally appropriate meals that children enjoy. We've always earned student satisfaction ratings above 90% and as high as 96%. Our successes are indicative of the larger arc of progress that the district has seen in its school nutrition programs over the past 15 years, as pioneering legislation like the Healthy Schools Act, deep community engagement through the DC Food Policy Council, and caring nutrition professionals at the DCPS Office of Food and Nutrition Services have steadily increased expectations and standards for school meals in DC. From an implementation perspective, DCPS food service contracts are, in our experience, some of the most intensively and thoughtfully managed food contracts in the district, if not the region. We believe OFNS is a critical and committed part of helping us continue making healthy, delicious, substantial, and locally sourced school meals a daily reality for all DCPS students. Today, we hope our experiences and ideas can be helpful in ensuring that the procurement activities meant to support OFNS's mission do just that. We are now 18 months into a contracting process that has included a canceled solicitation, conflicting messaging, and last week, noticed that previously awarded contracts set to start October 1st were being rescinded. We are also less than 1 month away from the expiration of an emergency contract that has been incrementally extended a few months at a time for more than 2 years. While today's discussion may include many questions about the process that brought us here, we would also ask for Council and DCPS's urgent partnership on finding a way forward that will allow for responsible and transparent transitions between vendors should these new contracts reflect such changes. Continued delays on the procurement side risk putting food service workers, food service providers, and school communities in untenable positions. The current timeline, as we understand it from DCPS, with final contracts delayed until December and an early January start date just a few weeks later, risks serious compliance and safety issues, including those relating to required DCPS background checks and student dietary accommodations. It's important to note that we aren't just a vendor. DC Central Kitchen is also a mission-driven local nonprofit that cares deeply about how our city addresses childhood food insecurity, invests its food dollars, and upholds the goals and values residents have articulated for our food system. The committee correctly points out that school food service contracts have been contentious. We believe some of these tensions could be alleviated by more community-driven and inclusive procurement processes, clearer communication while these processes are underway, and careful coordination around what happens between the approval of a contract and the first day of food service under that contract. Since 2010, we have been part of 4 significant rebids of this contract, and this is the 3rd one to arrive on a timetable that hindered the oversight role of council, opportunities for community input and local business involvement, and the efforts of providers like us to ensure safe, seamless, and cost-effective food service. As a city, we should be learning from these experiences, and we're happy to do whatever we can to support that effort. Some of the structural issues that are likely to be raised in this hearing can be found in food service contracting across numerous district agencies. We would encourage council to take a serious look at how well we procure and prioritize food and nutrition contracts throughout district government in collaboration with the Food Policy Council and other local experts. DC Central Kitchen would welcome the chance to share our experiences and our ideas for solutions as part of that process, not simply as a vendor, but as a deeply invested partner in building a food system that improves health, broadens prosperity, and rips out hunger by its roots. We hope we will be given the chance to do more than ever before for our city by way of this potential new contract, and we will continue doing everything in our power to meet and exceed the expectations of our DCPS partners, the council, and our school communities. We hope council and DCPS will work with us to make the best of this current contractual situation by communicating transparently, minimizing any disruptions to children, workers, and our local food system, and driving continued progress in school nutrition programs here in DC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and I'll have some questions for you in a moment. Let me ask Mr. Nadeau. So the students at Czech, which is for the public who's watching the Columbia Heights Education Campus, some of them got together last year to sort of take on as a project improving the school meals.
Yes, that's correct.
And that included a survey, and I think you said 60% of the students found the meals to be unsatisfying.
Yeah.
Your sense is that that's improved a little bit?
Yeah, it has improved, but still, students still don't enjoy the food. There's like they're eating it because it's like still edible, but they still don't like the food that they're eating. But back then, it's like they refused to eat it at all.
And is this because it's spoiled?
It's because how it looks and tastes.
How it looks and tastes. So it's not that the food is spoiled or unhealthy in that sense, but just how it looks and tastes. So you met with, I think you said the vendor, your school is Sodexo?
Mhm.
And you found them responsive, that is, willing to work with you all,
Yeah, they were working with us. Yes.
and they made some improvements.
Mhm.
But would it be fair to say you think more improvements could be made?
Yes.
Are the students going to continue to be engaged on this issue at your school?
Yes.
Great. Let me turn to Mr. Moore for a second. You said, Mr. Moore, that last week you received notice that the previously awarded contracts were being rescinded.
That's correct.
Is that the only communication you've gotten? Is just, I assume it's a letter or email?
It was an email with a brief letter attached to the PDF. That's correct.
Anything else to sort of, I'll say, cushion the blow?
No.
Okay. And well, was there anything that gives you hope that they're going to try again?
So what try again means, I think, is an important sort of issue to parse through. Right now, what we've been focused on in close communication and very active communication with DCPS on is another bridge extension of our existing contract for the 12 schools that we do serve in DC public schools, to be able to continue that service at those 12 schools through the remainder of the calendar year. So that's been a very intense process, lots of contractual back and forth, really, in terms of compiling documents that'll be required for that ultimate package to go to council for approval. And so that's something even this morning we've been working to finalize with DC Public Schools to ensure they have absolutely everything they need from us to ensure that there is continuity of service in the remainder of the calendar year as this larger process with the current RFP is addressed.
I don't want to sound stupid asking the question, but what would you need to give them that you haven't already given them? So you've bid on the contract that has been, well, the bidding hasn't, excuse me, the procurement hasn't been rescinded, but I guess the award was rescinded.
That's
But you
correct.
provided materials in connection with that.
Right.
And you are an ongoing vendor right now. So what more would need to be provided?
A lot of this is sort of backup documentation. It's proof of insurance, it's business licenses, it's pricing, which has not changed for us, but confirming that our pricing will not change. And so it's sort of going through the sort of piecemeal set of requirements that'll be required at different levels of approval for this contract, less so than us generating something new. But it is a lot of paper chasing on our part to ensure that, again, we're able to continue doing the work that we've been doing in DC schools for 13 years.
You said that includes, for instance, copies of your licenses.
Yes.
How many times have you submitted that? In the past 18 months, how many times have you submitted copies?
Depending on the license, I think there have probably been 3 to 5 probably distinct processes where we've done significant document compilation efforts for the various extensions or applications we put together.
Now, you also testified, I'm looking at your statement, what happens between the approval of a contract and the first day of food service under that contract. So that would be assuming that you were to get the award after whatever the next steps are, you would be notified that you've gotten the award. And then how long would you need? And I'm assuming you're not different than any other vendor. So I'm really asking in that context, not about DC Central Kitchen, but vendors. How long do you need between notice of award and the first day of school?
I think a responsible transition, I recognize we're at time, I hope I can really address this, is 8 to 12 weeks, right? From when a vendor knows that they might be moving into a school or a group of schools. You have to be able to engage with incumbent workers to know if they want to come work for you or if they want to stay with their current employer. That's only fair for incumbent workers to be able to make that type of informed choice. You have to investigate equipment. You have to understand inventory. You have to negotiate with previous vendors. You have to make sure you have the student dietary accommodations on hand so that whatever meals you're preparing on day one are completely safe for students who may have allergies or other accommodations. And so trying to do that in a 4-week span, which is potentially the timeline we're talking about here, that raises some significant concerns. And we're a vendor who is here in DC, knows DC, has many, many deep connections. Different vendors may be starting from different places. And so making sure that we have a solid 8 to 12 week period from confirmation of that contract and the ability to engage with any new schools, new school communities, existing vendors to really begin that process. We can't shortchange that, or we're going to have continuity and safety of service issues.
So I'm just thinking, how do I want to ask this question? So let's say, because I guess you're not at Columbia Heights Education Campus since Mr. Nadeau said that Sodexo is there. So let's say you were awarded Columbia Heights. So you would have to go into the school and what do you do tomorrow if you get the award today? What would you do?
It's a complex process. One is a physical plant sort of investigation, right? What is the state of the freezer, refrigeration units, equipment? How well does it align with the menus and preparation techniques that your staff may need to do? It's certainly engaging with school communities. You need to understand from an administrator perspective, what types of early childhood programs do they offer? What types of breakfast in the classroom preferences do they have? What, again, student dietary accommodations? Can meals be carted along a ramp to different locations in the school if you're doing classroom-based service, or do you need a staff member who's strong enough to lift those trays of food? All of those different pieces really do vary widely based on the conditions and previous history of the school. And so you have to know what you're getting yourself into so that you have food in the right place, in the right way, of the right quality and time and temperature on that first day of service. You got to think about uniforms, and most notably, DCPS background checks are a significant and very real and very understandable requirement for new food service staff. And so a vendor needs to know how many folks they're hiring. They need to be able to vet those folks and make sure that they're qualified from a culinary, but also background perspective. We need to know how many incumbent workers might be part of that incoming new team, folks staying with that school. And then you've got to make sure everybody's trained and in compliance with everything that DCPS and the USDA would expect on the first day of school. So these processes really can't be rushed, and they're established in regulation and in law. And 4 weeks is not, I think, a practical timeline to consider any sort of wholesale changes to vendors. And that's something that we may be looking at here if we aren't really intentional about the process.
So I'll go back to Columbia Heights as a check as an example. So you don't know how large that school is or how small that school is. So you have to figure that out. That doesn't take very long. But then based on that, you have to figure out how many employees you have. So you're in 12 schools right now. If next year you only have one school, that's not likely, but you have only one school and that's check. I assume you can just move employees there. But if you have 12 and you go to 13, you have to hire employees. That's what you're saying?
That's correct.
And you have to, in hiring those employees, unless they're already vetted by DCPS, they have to go through background checks?
Absolutely.
We had a hearing last year on background checks. That can be months. And then all the other things you mentioned. I think that may be all the questions I have. Let me see if Councilmember Fruman has any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I'll start with you, Mr. Moore. These contracts were just rescinded. They were going to start on October 1. Had you done that groundwork for the schools that you were slated to move into? So you had done that hiring, had scouted out the kitchens and things like that, or were you waiting for council approval of the contracts before you did that?
Yeah, I want to be sensitive in terms of anything we may or may not have sort of authorization to share, but we could not be allowed to do any of that sort of pre-school level work in the event of any type of award, nor would any other vendor until that council approval was in hand. And so without some other type of solution, that type of advanced planning, that type of really ground truthing, school by school understanding, those important conversations, and certainly, again, meeting with incumbent workers and food service workers, it isn't possible until that final approval is in place. So that is hugely important. And so again, while this rescission came at a date that we weren't expecting, and certainly would have made the timeframe very different had it not come, it's something that we need to make sure we get right the second time around and leave appropriate time for, because that communication hasn't been able to happen yet and won't be able to happen without that type of approval, as we understand it.
So, I mean, that does make me shudder, because if the timetable is council approval of the contracts in early December, when you have the holiday season and you would start on January 1, that's an enormously challenging situation. It's almost hard. It might be the hardest time to have to do that, to get all of those people lined up, do that work, get the clearances, and you can't start until we've done our approval.
That's our understanding of the process. That's correct.
Okay, well, that should put a fire under all of us. One of the things that you talked about was community input into the procurement process, and I'm not sure what that means, how that how you envision that working, but I'm curious how what you're referring to when you use that reference.
Yeah, I remember very vividly experiences and conversations we had as part of the DC Food Policy Council after the last contract was awarded in 2016. And we convened numerous community town halls, bringing together OFNS staff, DCPS staff, food service workers, community advocates, procurement professionals, farmers, having conversations about what would the next round of this look like? What could it look like? What could it mean to really live out the values of the Healthy Schools Act? Since then, we passed more legislation here in the district, the Healthy Students Amendment Act in 2018. So I'm sure, again, local legislation and regulation was part of the design of this procurement. But when you think about the opportunities we could have had, right, to more widely share this solicitation, think about what type of requirements could have been included for local businesses to be part of this end result in terms of the contract. Opportunities to determine what is the language of the Good Food Purchasing Program, which is part of district legislation, actually mean in this RFP. There are so many people who care so deeply about school nutrition in the District of Columbia. So many folks who have backgrounds in nutrition, dietetics, culturally relevant foods, chefs. We could have had something that looks more like our RFP process in development projects apply here in food service. And I think you would have a different tenor of the conversation here. You'd have a lot more trust, you'd have a lot more transparency, a lot more insight. And instead of having some of the paper chase activities we've been having here with thousands of pages of documentation going back and forth, we could really be asking the right questions that would lead to, I think, better results in our city's cafeterias.
That's really helpful. And I mean, that's not going to happen now because we got to get this done quickly. But I guess what you're referring to is in the next round, when the next contract gets bid out, maybe we should be doing a process like that. That's helpful. I do wonder, I mean, you referred to how good the district is at this once you get into implementation, partly because of all of the new laws that have come onto the books, the activism inside of the agencies. Does that also make the process more complicated in the procurement stage because we have this new good stuff that's out there?
I'm sure it does, right? This is not a straightforward USDA reimbursement landscape, right? There are absolutely local regulations, there's local funding, and there are local expectations that we have here that are hugely important. But they're also wonderful assets, right? And I would encourage you, see if you can have a conversation and sit in a vendor meeting that OFNS has with some of its vendors, right? These are really intense conversations that drill into the minutia of how well vendors are performing and what a good job they're doing or where they have reason to improve. And I think that's a model for how food service contracts could be monitored and enhanced across the district, because there is that level of shared buy-in, shared trust, and solution solving when there are challenges. And I imagine that my fellow hearing participant here could speak to some of that. When you have multiple people sort of speaking about those challenges at multiple levels, you can maybe finally drive some of that, and it can lead to some of that more receptiveness that you hope for from a vendor perspective, because those questions are being asked consistently of vendors multiple times a month, frankly, in those interactions with OFNS.
So again, really very, very helpful. I've heard that, I mean, DCPS does procurement in this area. Other agencies do procurement in this area. DPR may do procurement in this area. Maybe others do food service procurement. And I also hear that food service procurement is particularly complicated. Is there something we should be thinking about in terms of how it's organized so that we bring folks under the same roof, or link them through a working group, or do something so that in each of the agencies, at a minimum, people are benefiting from best practices and shared information? Is there something structural, not just at DCPS, but across the city government, that we should be thinking about in this space?
I think that's a really important sort of avenue for conversation. Part of the DC Food Policy Council and Director Act were meant to sort of enshrine food across different agencies in a very interdisciplinary way, because it is an interdisciplinary, interagency, cross-cutting issue. And so there could be opportunities to engage the ex officio members of the DC Food Policy Council, to work with the Sustainable Procurement Working Group, which is an official part of the DC Food Policy Council, to sort of build that shared awareness. And I think we also just need to be more candid as a city that food procurement is not construction procurement. So we need to stop filling out construction forms every time we want to do a food service contract. We need to be honest about that. We need to come up with what are the right forms to ask the right questions of food service vendors, whether they're local CBEs, whether they're nonprofit organizations, whether they're local catering companies. There are lots of ways food needs to move throughout the district, and ways that we can invest our tax dollars in very intentional ways to get the outcomes and food system that we want. And we need to make sure all of those questions are asked before some of these larger and more complex solicitations hit the street, in which case any local nonprofit nonprofit, any local CB is usually way behind the curve in being able to fairly participate in those opportunities.
Okay, again, very, very helpful. I just have a couple of questions for Yedidia, if he's still here. I'm curious, Yedidia, the quality of the food at Czech. I mean, one of the things that you referred to about Czech is that, I mean, it is a truly wonderful place and the level of diversity is really something. To what extent is the challenge meeting people's tastes and expectations because they come from, may come from different cultures and have different preferences? And to what extent is it about, as the chairman was talking about, you know, food being poorly prepared for what it is, or spoiled, or things like that? To what extent do the specific needs at Czech feed into the challenge?
So I believe, especially right now with the food and how it tastes, and students are so used to the food being very bad, I feel like, especially if you get some good new food, they'll be more excited for it. And since everybody comes from a different background, I feel like it'll be very difficult for somebody to get a food they're used to at home, and then you see a copy of it and it's not the same. I feel like it won't taste good at all. But also I understand, since every student, like we have a very diverse student body, because of that, I also believe that it's very important. So I think it's going to be difficult, but I think it's still accomplishable.
I mean, that's really helpful, actually. I mean, and the idea that trying to replicate what everybody in the school is used to is likely to be a failure, because you're not going to do it as well or in the particular way. And so there's something different that needs to happen there. That's very useful. Well, I sure hope that your food, if there was a little improvement, I hope that you get more improvement in the coming year.
Yeah,
Mr.
I would just like to clarify, the food equity is an initiative in our school. So it's not just like just students gathering up.
So I'm sorry, so the food equity, so the bunch of students at the school are organizing, trying to press for better food at Czech.
Is an initiative
It's an initiative.
with administrators and the teachers involved.
All right, well, that's very helpful. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson was with us, but I believe she was traveling. This is a chance to see if she's actually still here.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you can hear me.
Can hear you. Yes, I can.
Okay. Yes, my flight is about to take off, so I don't have enough time to ask questions, but I have been listening. And I had a conversation with Mr. Moore earlier this week. So I'll look forward to viewing the rest of the hearing. But thank you for holding this.
Thank you. So I'm going to thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you, Mr. Nadeau. You're both excused. I think you can continue to watch from the whatever we called in Zoom, the waiting room. Let me get the live witnesses. That's not to suggest anyone wasn't alive, but Roscoe Grant and Kenneth Mackey. When you're ready. You're on. No, you're off. You're on.
I'm on.
You're
Oh.
on.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the committee of the whole and staff. My name is Roscoe Grant Jr., co-founder of Small Business Protection 247. I agree with you, Chairman Mendelson, that these DCPS contracts have not been competitively bid on since 2016, when 2 contracts were awarded to 2 vendors to provide school meals. The companies Sedesto Magic, an out-of-town company, and DC Central Kitchen, a nonprofit company. I do not want the council to lose sight of the food service contracts that have been also provided to Gordon Foods, another out-of-town company. DCPS has a history of awarding contracts to these out-of-town companies without even receiving approval of the council. Another thing mentioned in your notice was that the quality of the meals were bad. And the young man just testified also to that. I do not understand how these current vendors will be able to deliver healthy and appetizing school lunches beginning in school year 2023-2024. Certified business owners, CBEs, have been blocked from participating in these contracting process. Local businesses had to deal with waivers previously being granted. Solicitations have been put out that only CBEs responded to, which were pulled back, and cooperative agreements have been awarded. All these types of actions on the part of DCPS is circumventing the CBE process. Mr. Chairman, cooperative agreements are not used to supplant local business participation in district procurements. Rather, they are one way in which procurement needs of the district agencies and residents are met. This is contrary to what is actually happening in DCPS. DCPS, in my view, has used cooperative agreements to circumvent the CBE process. Waivers that were requested were denied. Solicitations that were put out were rescinded, and cooperative agreements were issued to companies like DC Central Kitchen, Sodesto Magic, and Gordon Foods, to name a few, for the same services identified in the solicitations that were canceled. How? Why? Currently, there is no notification to the public that a cooperative agreement is being issued, similar to a solicitation being posted. Currently, there are no requirements for CBE participation on cooperative agreements. Mr. Chairman, cooperative agreements does not require notification similar to a solicitation, nor do they require CBE participation. The question is, were these cooperative agreements, purchasing agreements, entered into by the chief procurement officer or designee pursuant to the delegated contracting authority in 2-35201. The CPO may delegate contracting authority to employees of an agency, including OCP or another instrumentality. Agencies and instrumentalities subject to this chapter shall determine their requirements for goods and services and administering awarded contracts. The code of the District of Columbia reads 2-354-.11 corporate purchase. Corporate purchase agreements entered into by the district government shall be in accordance with, to the extent practical, all laws and rules of the district government with respect to the contracting, and shall be consistent with the laws and rules of the United States government that apply specifically to the district. In my opinion, the council should change the law that will require notification and CBE participation. The company Sodesto Magic reached out to the company Run Veggie LLC and to others to provide 35% on the current contract that is pending before the council. However, these companies were notified that the CBE participation was not required due to the cooperative agreement. Mr. Chairman, we have several DC-based companies that could provide 35% or more on these contracts. Quite frankly, if you look at all the companies that have performed on DCPS contracts, their grades would be an F. These contracting officers believe that only large companies can perform, and again, history would demonstrate that this is not the case. DC-based companies have a vested interest in the meals that are prepared for our children. I remember at your last hearing with DCPS, you showed them a couple of meals and asked the question, would they eat them? The room was silent, probably indicating that no one would eat them. Why would we continue to allow these companies to come into our schools or city to provide substandard meals to our kids? Why is DCPS always operating on an emergency basis when it comes to providing meals to our children, not getting the best results for our children and taxpayers? The District of Columbia companies hire and train District of Columbia residents who pay taxes, who pay higher wages than those fly-by-night companies coming into the city that do not have a vested interest in our people, our city taxes, wages, or rules and regulations. Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that the council should approve these contracts before you without 35% CBE participation. We cannot continue to allow qualified DC businesses to be left out of these economic opportunities in DCPS, which creates jobs for our residents and taxes for our city. I want to put on the record, Mr. Chairman, that I think that the mayor need to fire everybody in DCPS from the chancellor on down that has had anything to do with these contracts. This has been 7 delays on this particular contract. This is unacceptable, and it's a waste of our taxpayer dollars, and our children are not getting the best that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. And Mr. Mackey.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chairman Mendelson and esteemed members of the District of Columbia City Council. My name is Kenneth Mackey Sr., and I serve as the Operations Director of RECONVENED. It's located in Ward 5. I'm here today to express my deep concern and disappointment regarding the changes in the DC Public Schools service contracts, particularly the introduction of cooperative agreements. These changes have significantly implications for local businesses, including RECONVENED, and they undermine the very essence of the CBE program designed to support them. Background and context. RECONVENED, along with several other CBEs, has been active in promising discussions with the prime contractors for DCPS food services. Our aim has been to become a subcontractor, thereby contributing to the local economy, providing high quality nutritious food to our children. However, our efforts and those of other CBEs have been thwarted by DCPS's recent decision to create new cooperative agreements. These agreements effectively prevent CBEs like RECONVENED from participating in the upcoming food contracts, despite our ongoing negotiations with prime contractors. Number 2, the issue at hand, cooperative agreements and legal framework. According to the code of the District of Columbia, which Mr. Grant had recalled, 2-354.11. Cooperative purchasing, cooperative agreements must adhere to the contracting laws of both the DC and the United States. While cooperative agreements may offer a streamlined approach to procurement, they must not contravene local and federal laws designed to protect and promote local businesses, such as the CBE program. Number 3, economic impact on local businesses. The economic repercussions of this decision are far-reaching. By sidelining local businesses, DCPS is not only undermining the CBE program, but also missing out on an opportunity to invest in local economy. Local businesses are more likely to hire local residents, thereby reducing unemployment and increasing the tax base. RECONVENED has a representation of more than 50% of its staff, which are DC residents. The ripple effect of such decisions can lead to economic stagnation, something our community can ill afford, especially in these challenging times. Quality and community connection. Local businesses like RECONVENED have invested the interest and quality of their products. We are part of the community we serve. Our children go to DC schools where we aim to provide these services. The intrinsic connection ensures a level of quality and care that may not guarantee with larger and detached corporations. By excluding local businesses from the bidding process, DCPS risks compromising the quality of food, which the young man stated, and services provided to our children. Recommendations for a more inclusive approach. Number 1, transparency and inclusion. DCPS should revise its procurement processes to be more transparent and inclusive, thereby allowing CBEs an equal opportunity to participate. Number 2, review of cooperative agreements. A comprehensive review should be conducted to assess the impact of these agreements on local businesses. Number 3, community engagement. DCPS should actively engage with local businesses and community members to understand their needs and concerns. This feedback should be a critical component in the future contract awarding processes. Number 4, pilot program. DCPS should consider implementing pilot programs that allow CBEs such as my business participate in set aside contracts. This will serve as a proving ground for local businesses, offering them an entry point to larger, more lucrative contract. Lastly, accountability measures. Implement strict accountability measures to ensure that any cooperative agreements may do not undermine the objectives of the CBE program and are in compliance with the code 2-354.11. In summary, while the efficiency of cooperative agreements may seem attractive, it should not come to the expense of local businesses such as mine. By extension and the community at large, the current structure of DC food service contracts is misaligned with the goals and values of the District of Columbia, particularly those related to economic development and community well-being. I urge you, Mr. Councilman Mendelson and the full council to take immediate action to rectify this situation. Thank you for your time and consideration. I am available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Just a couple of questions. There are right now there are 2 incumbent vendors who are doing food service. I have no idea how many vendors there will be and who they will be for the food service next year. But just with the 2, Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen, neither of those are cooperative contracts or cooperative agreement contracts. The one with Gordon is, but Gordon, I believe, provides commodities, but doesn't do the food service.
Yeah, well, that's true to some extent. Well, it's my understanding, Chairman Mendelson, that when the solicitation was put out for this particular contract, it was pulled back and a cooperative agreement was issued for this contract that's out now. Because when the solicitation came out, Sodexo Magic reached out to Run Veggie and other CBEs, and they was involved in discussions about what percentage of the 35% each company was going to receive. And then we got a phone call saying that the solicitation had been pulled back and that they were going the cooperative agreement route. So that's how we got in this process. So
yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. The solicitation was issued in the spring of 2022, and then it was canceled, and
right.
The new solicitation was put out in November. And if I remember correctly, I think somewhere along the line, there was a ruling by DSLBD that there didn't need to be a subcontracting plan for a for-profit bidder. That's not the same as a cooperative. So just so the public knows, the cooperative contracts or contracts that are cooperative agreements are done through the council of governments with contracts that other jurisdictions get. So basically what the district does is it piggybacks on another jurisdiction's procurement. And I think that's the situation with Gordon Food. But again, Gordon provides commodities as I understand it. I do know they don't provide food service in the schools. And that's what's before us today.
Well, with Gordon, Chairman Mendelson, so I can put it on the record, there was 7 pilot schools that Gordon Food was providing food on 7 pallets. Fred Cook, who is the former corporation counsel in the city before we became the Office of the Attorney General, he filed paperwork with the cab, and DCPS decided to give Run Veggie a contract to provide paper products and chemicals. And they gave Gordon Food a contract to provide the food, the raw food for the schools. That went on for 90 days. And then they did another 90-day contract for both of those companies. And then they put out a solicitation for everything. Run Veggie was the only company that responded to that solicitation. When Veggie responded, DCPS pulled that contract back and they issued the cooperative agreement to Gordon Foods.
And when was this?
This was maybe a year ago that they did this. I can't remember exactly when, but I mean, you got DCPS people here, so they can tell you exactly when it happened. But that's what they did. You know, they took the contract back and they gave everything, the food, distribution, the chemicals, and the paper products. They gave it all to Gordon Schools for 7 schools that was a part of a pallet. You know, that's what they did. Now, again, and again, maybe you need to get clarification from DCPS. You know, Modesto Magic, because I was on phone calls with Modesto Magic when they asked Run Veggie and other CBEs to participate on the solicitation that they had bidded for. And then we got a call from Modesto Magic saying, hey, we don't have to deal with this 35%. And we said, why? They said, well, DCPS is going to cooperative agreement process. So there's no requirements for CBEs. And so that's what we were told, you know, by Modesto Magic. So, I mean, if they got a contract out there, then CBEs should be a party of that contract. And, you know, that's where my fight is at. I want to make sure that CBEs become a part of this contracting process. We have one of our CBEs in the audience, Ms. Pinky Eats. She didn't sign up to testify, but she is a CBE, and currently she has a contract that she's providing over 7,000 plus meals a day for residents in the district. She has 26 staff people.
For another agency.
Yeah, for another agency. Yes. But the point that I was trying to make, Chairman Minison, we have come together as CBEs in the food service industry. We have looked at this DCPS contract and we have said, okay, what part of this contract can you do? What part of this contract can you do? And collectively, if it was necessary, we could do 100% as the CBEs, or at the worst case scenario, we can do 35%. The point is, there's no need for DCPS to go outside of the District of Columbia, okay, to provide those services. We all have a vested interest, as Reverend Mackey is a Reverend. As he indicated, we have a vested interest because we have our kids that go to these schools that's getting these horrible meals that's being served. I mean, you even said it yourself, Chairman Minson, the meals are horrible. They're terrible. The young man said it today, and that's a fact. We've tasted the meals
I
as well.
held the food up. I didn't eat it.
I know you didn't eat it. You might not have been here today if you'd ate it.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I said that inclusively when I said correct. I don't have any other questions for you. Let me see, Councilmember Freeman, do you have any questions?
Just a very few. Thank you very much. I guess my questions may go to DCPS and I may not be able to be here when DCPS is there, but it seems like it's either that the contracts were done by a cooperative agreement and the way in which that operated, there was no requirement and no incentive for the use of CBEs, or there was a waiver by DSLBD to say that there wasn't a requirement for CBEs in this context. But one way or another, the CBEs there was no incentive for the prime contractor to use CBEs.
So let me just put on the record. When Modesto Magic got the very first contract, they got it as a result of a waiver that had been granted. When the contract came back up again, I reached out to Christy Whitfield and DSLBD and informed her that we had CBEs that could provide at least 35%. The waiver was denied. They then put out the solicitation, which is when Run Veggie and others was in negotiations with Modesto Magic on the current contracts that's before us that we're talking about now. And then they decided to pull the solicitation back and they issued a cooperative agreement. Now, when they did that, nobody was aware that they did that. The next thing we know, they're going down this other path and nobody seems to know anything about it. So if the council don't do anything else, I think there's two things the council need to do. I think that if cooperative agreements are going to be issued, then they should have notifications similar to a solicitation. And then second of all, they should require CBE participation. Otherwise, I mean, what's the incentive for businesses to pay all these taxes, high rent and everything else in the District of Columbia? And then at the end of the day, they don't get anything, you know?
Okay, so very helpful. Thank you very much on that. And how long has you been in business doing this sort of work? And
Well, I had 33 years in the government. I retired in 2004. I served in 3 mayors administration. So I know how this works. And I've been doing this ever since I've been retired. And I do it for free. I don't get paid for this. I don't get paid for this. I set up a 501c3 organization, and I work directly with local businesses. I help them get contracts. I help them get paid. When they don't get paid, I come down here and do the types of things that I'm doing now to fight and advocate for them. You know, as the chairman knows, my background was with unions, and so it's just a continuation of the stuff that I did when I was with the unions. So I enjoy doing this every day. I believe in working with people that want to work with me. I reached out to the superintendent prior to this hearing, and I suggested that maybe he needs to look at this whole process and at least bring some CBEs on. And I haven't heard anything from him. And I think that's very disrespectful when you send somebody an email and they don't respond back one way or the other. And so that's the reason why I'm angry the way I am. As far as I'm concerned, they all need to go.
so and you do that. You are a leader on the advocacy on behalf of businesses like Reverend Mackey,
Yeah,
and
correct.
Reverend Mackey and Pinky, who welcome to Ward 3. Pinky also has Flavature, and really great to have you in Woodley Park. How long have you been in this business of doing food service, Reverend
It's
Mackey?
been close to a year now.
Close to a year.
Yeah.
And have you been able to secure any contracts with the DC government, whether it's DCPS or be a subcontractor for a food service contract with another agency?
Well, we serve the aging population now, about 500 meals a day through the Department of Aging in the District of Columbia, which has been a high value and review from those citizens each day with quality nutritional meals. So it has been a great return for us.
And in the process, you're building a track record that could be useful to other agencies as they look
Absolutely.
at you as a potential partner.
Absolutely. That's our main goal. Our main goal is to grow and spread abroad throughout the District of Columbia. And now we're seeking to do the same for DCPS.
I wonder if the seniors are an easier audience or a harder audience than.
Harder.
Complex,
Harder.
yes, but they are very, very satisfied with the quality and the service that we provide to them.
Okay, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony, and I have your statement, so
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Let me turn now to the executive, Patrick Ashley, who's the Chief Fiscal Strategy for DC Public Schools. I will note for the record that I was in communication with the Chancellor the last week or two, and I indicated that I was not asking or demanding that he personally be here at the hearing. So I'm satisfied with Mr. Ashley being here. And when you're ready.
Great.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think this is your first hearing before the committee of the whole.
It is. Good to see you, Chairman. So good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, members of the council and staff. I'm Patrick Ashley, Chief of Fiscal Strategy for the District of Columbia Public Schools. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to testify before you today on DCPS food services contracts. The food service contracts are some of DCPS's most complex, forward-facing, and critical contracts. The solicitation, evaluation process, and awards for this service provide a level of complexity which has required additional time by all parties than originally anticipated. In addition, because some of our contract findings earlier this year, DCPS and our partners have been laser focused on ensuring that all of our contracts meet all requirements as we continue to build a better and more robust contracting process. While I recognize that this has meant delaying the start of these contracts, we believe that it is critically important to get them right while balancing service delivery to our students. DCPS has been working in partnership with the DC Office of Contracts and Procurement and the DC Office of Attorney General to be able to source the next vendors who will continue to provide high-quality food services to our students. DCPS has worked to provide our students with high-quality food services both through our vendor-operated program and self-operated programs, and takes this responsibility very seriously. Current contracted food services are provided through two vendors, Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen. This contract was originally awarded to these vendors in 2016 and covered services through a series of option years ending in 2021. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, the decision was made to extend these services while a new multi-year solicitation was contemplated and issued. Our intent was for these contracts to begin on October 1 of 2023. The current services have been extended through September 30th of 2023, and DCPS will present two additional contract actions for council approval, which will extend services for a final period through December 31st of 2023. To provide more context, I'll provide some background information on the timing of our contract activities. In late 2021, DCPS began planning for recompeting the DCPS food service management contract. In spring of 2022, DCPS issued a solicitation, but this solicitation was canceled to allow for additional time to consider requirements as we transitioned out of the pandemic. In late 2022, DCPS issued a new solicitation for food services with responses due in January of 2023 to allow vendors more time to provide a comprehensive response to our request for proposal. The solicitation was subsequently amended, and our vendors were provided the opportunity to respond in March of 2023. Best and final offers were requested from the vendors due in April of 2023. After consulting with the food service program and the Office of Contracts and Procurement, the decision was made to issue an additional modification to the solicitation in May of 2023, which required DCPS to engage all respondents to update their proposals by late May. Once responses were received, the technical evaluation panel, which consisted of DCPS subject matter experts, met to score the vendors and initiate contract negotiations in late May. Proposed contract packages were then submitted to the Office of Attorney General, and we have worked closely with OAG staff to obtain legal sufficiency for our contract packages. The assigned contracting officer, a detailed employee from OCP, has been regularly engaging with our vendor community to obtain necessary compliance documents. During the legal sufficiency review process, however, it's been determined that the proposals DCPS received required additional evaluation. As a result of this delay, we believe the best path forward is to delay the start date of the new contract until January 1st of 2024. This start date would allow DCPS to ensure continued services and an orderly transition between vendors if a vendor change is required. We have provided communication to the vendor community that we must revisit the evaluation process and will be soon following up with them regarding next steps. Moving forward, DCPS will continue to ensure that we are engaging in procurements that are efficient, cost-effective, and provide our students with the quality services that they need. DCPS has received extensive support from the Office of Contracts and Procurement, and we regularly consult with OCP leadership, including Ms. Nancy Hateman, Interim Director and Chief Procurement Officer, and Mr. Will Giles, Interim Deputy Chief Procurement Officer. They have provided training and technical assistance as DCPS continues to strengthen its contracting process, as well as have detailed 3 OCP contracting officers to assist with DCPS procurements. Additionally, as we have been working with OAG to obtain legal sufficiency, we are meeting twice a week with OAG counsel to ensure that we are moving the food services packages as quickly as possible. And OAG leadership has assured DCPS that food service contracts are a priority for them and are currently being reviewed. As we look at bringing this contract to an award, we continue to work with our vendor community and OAG on key milestones. Our goal is to have these contracts awarded by the first week of December. In early September, we will solicit information from our vendors to complete our final evaluation process. The vendors will have 5 business days to return information back to DCPS, at which time the final evaluation process will occur. We anticipate submitting all documents formally to OAG by early October, and will work with the OAG to obtain legal sufficiency by the end of October. At that time, the final contract package will be immediately submitted to the mayor's office for final review and transmission to the council for consideration by mid-November. This will allow the contract to be approved by the council by early December, pending any additional follow-up from the council. As we look forward to a successful contract award, DCPS has confidence in its implementation plan and anticipated monitoring of the new contract through the RFP requirements and the evaluation process. The subject matter experts on the panel have taken a thoughtful approach in reviewing the proposals and have evaluated the responses accordingly. We want to be clear that students are and always will be at the heart of the DCPS food and nutrition program. By policy, all new menu items, including those presented as part of this procurement, are required to be taste tested with the students like we did this past March and must be scored with an evaluation rubric. This approach is helpful in selecting meals that students approve conceptually. To that end, ongoing monitoring is critical to ensure that we meet the high standards set in every contract, and especially the food services contract. There will be an increase in regular visits, planned and unplanned, throughout the school years by all members of the food and nutrition services. This year, DCPS is adding additional 5 food and nutrition services temporary operations field specialists to ensure that satisfaction and food service quality are maintained to the highest level of food and service satisfaction as we implement a new contract. The temporary staff will duplicate the efforts of the current 5 contract field specialists. This additional staffing structure allows the F&S operations team to have a higher level of visibility across the district to ensure that results are tangible and shortcomings are minimized and addressed right away. DCPS recognizes the reliance on its stakeholders to provide the valuable feedback needed to continually improve the food and nutrition program. And we look forward to meeting with our families and vendors throughout the school year to understand how we can best serve our students in this new chapter of DCPS food services contract. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm joined by Deputy Chief of Food and Nutrition Service, Mr. Robert Jaber, and we are available to answer your questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Ashley. Last Thursday, I emailed Chancellor Farabee and I said this for today's hearing. And I quote, "I expect your DCPS testimony to focus on the timeline with milestones for finishing the procurement and initiating the new contracts. This should include every step and specific dates or ranges from the new vendors being in place backward to council approval and backward from there to include every step to obtain contract awards, legal sufficiency, and IQ approvals. Also, I may ask about what outreach DCPS has made to the June awardees who have now been put on hold. I expect they are very frustrated right now. Also, how much DCPS is utilizing OCP's expertise," unquote. I repeat, I ask for every step and specific dates. This is the testimony today. Quote, "We continue to work with our vendor community and OAG on key milestones. Our goal is to have these contracts awarded by the first week of December. In early September, we will solicit information from our vendors to complete our final evaluation process. The vendors will have 5 business days to return information back to DCPS, at which time the final evaluation process will occur. We anticipate submitting all documents formally to OAG by early October, and we will work with the OAG to obtain legal sufficiency by the end of October. At that time, the final contract package will be immediately submitted to the mayor's office for final review and transmission to the council for consideration by mid-November. This will allow the contract to be approved by the council by early December, pending any additional follow-up from the council, quote unquote. This is not every step and specific dates. Why am I being so particular? Let me review DCPS's assiduous labors for the past year. In the spring of 2022, DCPS released an RFP to secure new food service contracts. Despite receiving responses, the solicitation was canceled. A new RFP was issued November 28th. Responses were due December 28th. The response date was revised to January 11th. Taste tests were then added as a requirement on March 2nd. Taste tests have been part of the spring 2022 RFP, but not included in the November RFP. Responses were due March 8th. That was revised to March 15th. Best and final offers were requested on April 5th, due April 11th. The RFP was then reopened on May 11th. Responses were due May 22nd. DCPS then extended the deadline to May 26th. At my monthly meeting with the chancellor in June, I was assured that the contracts would be submitted before early July. At a May 31st hearing, the council was assured the contracts would be submitted before July. At my monthly meeting with the chancellor in June, I was assured that the contracts would be submitted before July. On June 26, OPLA sent an email stating that the school year 2023 food service contracts would be submitted in August, and that short-term extensions had been executed for the period July 1st to September 30th. By letter July 19th, the chancellor stated unequivocally that the contracts would be submitted to the council on August 17th. Accordingly, the committee scheduled an August 22nd hearing to obtain public testimony on the contracts. On August 16th, I was informed the contracts would not be submitted August 17th. I was given the vague explanation that they were hung up with the OAG for legal sufficiency. The foregoing reflects a disorganized and unplanned procurement exacerbated by false promises. More importantly, it denies any meaningful opportunity for council or parent reaction to the proposed food service contracts. So I've asked for milestones, every step, specific dates. Otherwise, how can we trust DCPS? So, Mr. Ashley, on what date will you solicit new information from the vendors? Your statement says early September. We're in early September. By what date?
You're correct, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the changing in the timelines. And I want to mention that as we've provided timelines, that's based on the contextual information that we have at the time. And we've been working closely with the Office of Attorney General to be able to provide that legal sufficiency. And I understand that you had a conversation with the Attorney General to talk through some of those timelines. We have started meeting with OAG to go through every single document in real time, rather than typically the process has been that we submit something to OAG and they submit that back to us. OAG currently has our documents that we need to solicit information from the vendors. We meet again with them tomorrow. They have not provided a timeline in which that they will sign off on the final information that we need to send to the vendors.
So you don't have a date on which you will solicit new information from the vendors?
Our conversation with the Office of Attorney General has been early September. We have not committed to a specific date as they work through this in the iterative process of going back and forth with our contracting officers and the OAG. So we do have milestones, and I'm happy to provide you a milestone chart that sort of ends the, sort of when our critical endpoints are. But what we've provided today is an understanding of where we believe we're going to hit those milestones.
Will this be the last request for information from the vendors?
We believe so, yes.
But you don't know for sure.
As part of the evaluation process, we have additional information that we're going to solicit from the vendors. If they don't respond back fully, we may have to request additional information, but we don't have any additional requests planned.
What is your deadline or date by when the vendors must respond? You said 5 business days, but do you have a calendar date?
Again, that would depend on when we send out the additional information or the request for additional information, which is dependent on once we get sign off from OAG. Again, we expect that to be very soon. We meet with them twice a week. We met with them on Tuesday. We'll meet with them again tomorrow and working through that process. And I believe that we are close. I attend those meetings personally as well. I believe that we are close to being able to send that out next week.
So your testimony says that when you get the response from the vendors, within 5 business days, the final evaluation will occur. How long will this take?
We don't expect that it'll take a considerable amount of time. We don't require a significant amount of information from most of our vendors. And so we expect that evaluation, again, a lot of in contracting is less so about the evaluation and more about the documentation. And so as we, do the evaluation, it's also the documentation. We work with the OAG to make sure that documentation is, fully defensible. to make sure that our contracting process is thorough and complete.
So what is your deadline or date when this final evaluation will be completed?
So let me pull up the, 1 second. So we believe that we'll send this back to the Office of Attorney General by early October at the latest.
So you don't have a date for the final evaluation to be completed?
Again, all of this is somewhat contingent upon when we can send something out to the vendors. And so we haven't provided today a specific date while we wait for the final feedback from the Office of Attorney General.
I'm sorry, say that again. You have not provided a specific date because you're waiting for feedback. Is that what you just said?
Again, it's all of this is contingent upon that we get a sign off from the Office of Attorney General to say move forward. And this is, again, we both agree that this is the information that we need to bring this to closure. That is what we are waiting on. Once we have that date, we can provide with more specificity the specific milestones that we intend to meet.
Following the final evaluation, what are the next steps before submitting the awards to OAG?
Yeah, so once the final evaluation is completed, that is when the documentation process happens. Our contracting officer completes her documentation and make sure that we have all of the worked with the vendors to obtain any compliance documents that are necessary. I know in the conversations that you had with DC Central Kitchen, you talked about licensure. There's also clean hands documentation. There's contract negotiation that has to happen to make sure that, again, these are 100-page long plus documents that we work with the vendors to make sure that they're comfortable with and make sure they're comfortable with our terms. And so all of that happens after the evaluation process, but before it is submitted to the Office of the Attorney General, because the Office of Attorney General is looking at the complete package. And that's after the vendors have responded and said, you know, yes or no, we don't agree with these contract terms.
So what's your deadline? That is the date to submit all documents formally to the OAG.
Early October.
And what does that mean?
You know, again, like I don't want to give a specific date, just because, again, it's all very much dependent on when we get this feedback back from the vendors.
Well, let me just say, because we just had this conversation a minute ago about early September. This is early September. Today's September 6th.
You're correct.
Let me see, 2 days from now will be September 8th. That might still be early September, but next week would be September 11th, and I wouldn't call that early September. So what's early October?
I would say the first week and a half of October. Again, I met with OAG. We met with OAG yesterday, Tuesday. And we'll meet with them again tomorrow, and we'll have a better understanding of when that we are ready to submit or request information from the vendors.
So not to give you a hard time, but the first week and a half of October is on or before October 11th, which I would think of being more like the middle of October, 11th, 15th, sort of like the middle. So assuming that all the documents are in order, what has OAG told you they will need before finishing their work?
Yeah, so OAG has worked with us extensively again in real time as of late to be able to be more responsive to our requests. They've put additional resources to be able to turn around documents faster. OAG has not been willing to commit to a particular turnaround time, but they do understand that this is a priority. Both the chancellor has had a conversation with the Chief Deputy Attorney General and Attorney General and have a commitment that this is a priority.
What are you doing to ensure that all the documents are in order when you submit to OAG?
It's a great question. It's one of the reasons why we've started meeting every 2 weeks or twice a week with the Office of Attorney General. Previously, our meetings with the Office of Attorney General were somewhat ad hoc in nature. And, you know, they have other contracts that they are also working on. And so they would provide feedback when they were able to provide feedback. By now meeting with them twice a week, we're able to have more real-time feedback to be able to ensure that we're getting timely delivery of feedback and having that iterative process between the OAG and our contracting officer.
So what's your contingency should OAG find that there's a problem?
I don't believe that OAG would find that there's a problem, again, because we've been engaged with them so closely over the last few weeks to make sure that, again, everything is happening in real time. Typically, the Office of Attorney General receives packages and responds back to packages. And it doesn't provide this sort of real-time conversation. And so what we've committed to do is making sure that there are no more surprises. This was a surprise to us that the OAG found that there was additional evaluation that needed to occur. And we found that out too late in the process. And so we're trying to avoid any sort of additional surprises.
Following OAG's legal sufficiency, what's your deadline, that is date, to submit the contract package to the mayor's office?
I believe we stated that that would be in mid-November. So again, to your earlier statement, that would be sometime around the 15th of November.
What's your deadline, that is date, to submit the contracts to the council?
That would be that we would hope to submit it to the council by mid-November. Excuse me, I think I misspoke that we would anticipate submitting it to council for consideration by mid-November. That would give the council 2 or so weeks to be able to review that contract under the passive review process.
So a minute ago, you said that your deadline to submit the contract to submit the contract package to the mayor's office was mid-November, and now you're saying the deadline to submit to the council is mid-November.
Yeah, so specifically it says that we'll submit to OAG by early October. As soon as OAG provides legal sufficiency by the end of October, that we would submit that in early November. Apologies for the misspeak.
But you don't have a date.
I don't have a date for you today.
What arrangements has been made to ensure that the executive office of the mayor takes, say, 2 weeks, not say 5 weeks for its approvals?
I don't anticipate that being a problem. We've had conversations with EOM. We regularly talk with their attorneys as well. They are fully briefed on this and are an active participant in this process.
So your answer to what arrangements have been made to ensure EOM moves quickly is that you've had conversations already with them.
That's correct.
What arrangements have been made to ensure that OPLA and the IQ process moves quickly?
So EOM and the OPLA process are part and parcel to each other. So the OPLA process is really just submission into the IQ system, in which case that the mayor's office does the review and approval. OPLA, specifically in terms of OPLA's responsibilities, they do review, but they also are the ones that move that to the secretary's office. Once it's been approved by the mayor's office, that process typically takes less than a day.
Are you contemplating active or passive approval of the contracts?
We're contemplating passive approval of these contracts.
So by what date do you need council approval?
We would hope that these would be approved by, again, these contracts are intended to start on January 1st. And so we would need that approved prior to that date. Ideally, we would want these approved by, again, early December. And so that would mean that we would need to submit them late November, early December.
Now, a minute ago, you said that you would submit to the council. When I said, what's your deadline or date to submit the contracts to the council? You said, I think you said mid-November. I wrote down around the 15th.
Yeah, I think what I specifically said was by the contract to be approved by early December. and that we would submit them to council by mid-November. Again, Chairman, we can provide you a more detailed document, especially after we're able to have a conversation with OAG and get that initial sign off on getting additional evaluation from the vendors. And I recognize that you are looking for specific dates here. And I recognize that we have not met specific dates in the past, which is why, again, at the moment, we're working based on the context that we have to be able to hit these milestones.
So you want the vendors in place on January 1st?
Our expectation would be that the contract starts on January 1st. It's important to note that there is a phase in, phase out component of the contracts. And so there is a period in which that if there were any sort of vendor turnover, that the vendors would work with the outgoing and incoming vendors as part of an orderly transition process. So we would expect that as soon as the contract's approved, that the vendors would start having those conversations with the other vendors.
So if the council's approval is early December, which I'm assuming means by the end of the first week in December, which is December 8th,
Correct.
then they would have, if it's passive review, they would have from the 8th to the 1st for transition, for phase in, as you call it.
Yeah, I'm happy to let Mr. Jaber talk a little bit more about the phase in, phase out approach and how that we would handle that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again. Phase in, phase out. We're imagining a contract starting and implementation like a light switch. We're there, everybody's in place. And there is a reality that this is going to take time, as was mentioned by Mr. Moore and some other folks, in making sure that we are there, we are stable, we have enough labor, we have looked at the entire property, and we know exactly what to expect when we open for business. And to that end, the 90-day phase in, phase out is built into the contract. That should give us enough time to be able to strategically look at where our divisions of clusters will be for this procurement and respond accordingly. And that's going to happen, as we mentioned in Chief Ashley's testimony, along with the 5 temporary staff that we'll have. We've prepared ourselves to make sure that we can maintain satisfaction, that we can maintain the quality and support our vendors as we do this implementation.
So I'm confused. So a winning bidder, which very well could be somebody who's not an incumbent, or maybe it is an incumbent, but with different schools. What are they doing between December 8th, that's the first week of December, and January 1st? Let me just add, I think that Mr. Moore said, I think he said 8 to 13 weeks.
8 to 12 weeks, yes, sir.
Okay.
So at the point of approval, we would be in early December. That gives us a 4-week, well, 3-week window, 2-week if you include holiday.
Well, let's look. I have a calendar in front of me. There's
Thank you.
the week of December 11th.
Okay.
The week of December 18th, which ends on the 22nd, Friday the 22nd.
Okay.
Then there's the week of December 25th to the 29th.
That's correct. So the implementation would take part for those 3 weeks plus any time moving forward from the January 1st date. We anticipate that the pre-work of inspecting the sites, making sure that we have labor, is going to take place in those first 4 weeks. And we would be able to gradually transition our vendors, however it is structured, from one to the other. Because we use the fixed unit price contract, that allows us the ability to, it's a little bit more flexible. A vendor will not be paid unless they are active in that school. So it allows a little bit of time for the vendors to get comfortable, to get acclimated, the labor to be either absorbed or in addition. And while those 90 days are stretching, we have the ability to almost do a baton pass from one vendor to the other. We're monitoring, we're there, everybody is collaborative. We understand what the barriers are, we understand what the challenges are, and we're working forward together in that mode. And the resources that are being allocated to either vendor are active, and they're actively being paid for because they have the revenue that's coming in. So in other words, let's say DC Central Kitchen takes over a school from Sodexo. They can look, they can observe, they can prepare themselves. And when they're ready to go in and say, okay, we'll transition on this date, at that point, they're taking the responsibility and they're getting the revenue at the same time.
So to use that example, I kind of hesitate to name names so I'm not going to use that example. Let's say Gordon Foods, because I think Gordon Foods is not a bidder. They were mentioned earlier. They don't do actual food
Correct.
service. So let's say Gordon Foods gets a check, which right now is Sodexo Magic. So they're told on December 8th. Is that right, Mr. Ashley?
So-
I'm only using that date hypothetically, if that's the first week of December.
Yeah, so when we talk to our vendors prior to submitting a package with OAG, we notify them that they're a proposed awardee. And so that, again, that contract negotiation happens and goes to the OAG. So it's at that point that they know that they are likely going to receive the award of the contract. And so at that point in time that they would know which clusters that they would most likely be getting.
Okay, so that was to OAG early October.
That's correct.
So using my example, Gordon is told in early October that they're going to check,
They would be told which clusters that they would be negotiating a contract for. That's correct.
but they can't go into check.
That's correct.
So when can they go into check?
Once that it's been approved by council.
So December 8th, just using these
Correct.
dates. On December 8th, they're told, hey, it's approved by council, now you can go into check.
Correct.
So then they have, if it takes 4 weeks, it takes them 4 weeks to get themselves situated. If it takes them 12 weeks, they have 12 weeks to get themselves situated.
They have the additional 12 weeks following the end of the contract period. And the phase in, phase out is a component of the contract as it ends. So the contract is still going until December 31st in our current status. And so phase in, phase out has been baked in there as well. And to that end, as we get to December 31st, if it's December 8th, we have the ability for vendors to go in and inspect and understand what they're about to absorb. And between that time and then the 90 days following the end of the contract term, we would be able to have full transition completed.
Okay, so going in and discovering that the equipment actually doesn't work very well, needs to be replaced, and realizing this is a new school in terms of additional to what they've been doing. So they have to hire and they have to go through the background checks. They would have beginning January 1st, 90 days.
Correct.
And if they get that done in 4 weeks, then on February 1st, roughly, they would say to you, hey, we're ready to flip the switch at check. And they would start at check.
Yes, sir.
If it takes them 60 days, they would have until March 1st.
Yes, sir.
So concerns about the transition are handled or covered by this 90 days after the contract begins.
We have faith that it will be. We are actively looking at this and making sure that the timing aligns.
And that's the whole point of why the phase in, phase out is baked into the contract, is because we know that in no circumstances could a vendor just one day turn the light switch off and transition to another vendor. It would be chaotic. And so when this contract was contemplated in 2016, that was a provision that was included. When this contract is contemplated in 2023, if that we go through all option year periods, and 5 years from now, we will be having the same conversation about phase in, phase out. It's meant to be for an orderly transition.
Now, I understand from today's testimony that DC Central Kitchen was one of the vendors who was told in June they could go forward. And the testimony today was expressed concern about this transition. So what you're explaining to me, has that been explained clearly to the bidders?
I am unaware of who the bidders are, sir. I'd have to defer.
Yeah, we have not had specific conversations about phase in, phase out yet with the vendors.
I want to say why. And one of the questions that I had that I said to in that email to the chancellor, which I mentioned at the beginning. I may ask about what outreach DCPS has made to the June awardees who have now been put on hold. And the impression I have is none, other than a letter saying we rescinded your contract, your award.
I would say that there are, in the procurement process, there are certain things that we can and can't say. We have sent them a formal notification that said that the contract has been rescinded. We do anticipate, and I recognize that that is frustrating. And we anticipate that again, later this week, early next week, we will send them the request for information in a formal fashion.
So am I to take it that this testimony, this hearing is the first opportunity that any of the awardees, rescinded awardees, have gotten to understand, I'll say, the softer edges to what's going on?
I would say that's correct.
And can you please take that back and revisit that? I just think that's, I mean, what a sucky way to treat people who you want to do business with.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I will add, though, there's not additional explanation that we can provide to protect the integrity of the procurement process, other than the fact that additional evaluation is required. And so I recognize we could have probably said that we will follow up with them on X date, but there wasn't more that we could say to that.
Well, there's more that's been said at this hearing that I think could be said to them. So the bottom line here is that there is not deadlines against which DCPS is working.
There are deadlines, and we recognize that January 1st is when that we need a new contract in place. We also have deadlines in terms of which that we will submit things in terms of, again, talking about late November. Once we have the final sign off from OAG, we can provide with more specificity about when those milestones will be reached. There are going to be certain milestones that we will provide you a critical end date, and that our goal is to meet that in advance of that. But we also know that we can't say that OAG will return this on X date, or that the vendors will have all of their compliance documents on X date. We work with our vendors on a regular basis. They're committed to providing back documents, but in some cases that we've seen, that requires changing of information with other DC government agencies. Sometimes that includes updating insurance or obtaining new insurance policies. And so all of that work takes time. And so we can provide a critical end date of when this is a critical point in which that we would be off track and that this contract would be at jeopardy. But we wouldn't be able to provide on this date as sort of our anticipated date. We can provide our best guess.
Well, I want to be pleasant here, but there can be dates. To me, a deadline is a date. It's not early November or late November or mid-November. It's a date. And it's a date that imposes a discipline toward which everybody works. And without those dates, there's no discipline. So when does OAG have to get back to you? There isn't a date. Early October, if I remember correctly, or no, this week. There's not a date. And so I think on this point, which is actually numerous questions, excuse me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to recess this hearing again and ask these same questions. And since you're meeting with OAG, I think you said twice a week,
That's correct.
maybe DCPS can work out with OAG some dates against which everybody is working.
Okay.
And I recognize that there are risks, but risks. So if one of the vendors doesn't give you the insurance certificate, that kind of maybe blows things. But on the other hand, it's a discipline.
Understood.
I'm going to ask a couple other questions. Right now, DCPS is functioning with new contracts, I believe, although I think somebody said extensions of emergency contracts. I think they're new contracts.
They are new contracts.
And there was a new contract with Sodexo Magic, which the council passively approved through September 30th. What's the plan?
So there's been two new contracts. There's been one that you mentioned, Sodexo Magic, which council passively approved.
Yes, I was going to do them in turn. So
Yeah.
just speak to Sodexo
Yeah.
Magic.
So we have worked as of last Tuesday when we notified the vendors of the rescission. We also requested pricing from our two incumbents, which is again Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen. They provided back that pricing. That pricing was due back to us on Tuesday of this week. Today, this morning, we submitted to OAG proposed contract packages to be able to bring contracts to council. Those were submitted this morning. Our intent in OAG is working through those currently. We'll have an update again tomorrow when we meet with them to understand where they are. We will send those to council for passive approval for Sodexo Magic. The DC Central Kitchen.
Hold on, don't go there.
Okay.
So for Sodexo Magic,
Yep.
you've submitted a contracted package to OAG for legal sufficiency to extend that contract from September 30th through the calendar year.
Correct.
And your plan is to submit that to the council for passive approval before October 1st.
I would say before October 1st because we need it approved by October 1st.
I think it has to be submitted for active approval by the council. Do you have a date by when you submit it to the council?
So we will submit it as soon as we get it back from OAG, provided that we provide at least a 10-day passive approval. I don't have my calendar up in front of me, but we would do the backwards math from there. That would,
We think it can't go through passive.
so it's already been, the current Sodexo contract has already been approved by council.
Yes.
And so it wouldn't be, it wouldn't require any sort of active approval. It would just be a simple modification of the current.
It's going to be more than $1 million.
Correct. It'd be a passive approval.
These things get arcane. Our thinking as I'm sitting here, subject to correction after I check with our general counsel, is that because it's a modification in excess of $1 million for Sodexo Magic, that it would require active approval. DC Central, let's go to DC Central, come back to Sodexo.
Okay.
I'm assuming the same thing with DC Central Kitchen.
DC Central is slightly different, excuse me. DC Central Kitchen, their initial contract was for $1 million. And so that would become a retro tipping contract as we, and has not yet been approved by council. So we would need active approval of that as we look to extend that to the end of the calendar year.
And that has gone to Attorney General?
That went this morning as well.
So do you know the date that you have to submit it to the council for active approval?
We would expect that we need to get it in for the September 19th legislative session. And so we would submit it 4 business days prior to that.
Yeah, we actually have deadlines. That was a snide remark, but we have deadlines. So for September 19th, I would have to notice it for the agenda on Thursday before, which is the 14th. I actually have to notice it by noon on the 14th.
Correct.
And I don't recall if you have to submit it to us before I notice it, but like on Wednesday. I need a copy of the draft by Tuesday or Wednesday, and you have to file it by Friday. That's my understanding.
we're
You should-
working with OAG on those deadlines and OPLA on those deadlines. So
So if that's the timeline, just gonna make the snide observation that we have specific dates. If that's the timeline for DC Central Kitchen, then it could be the same timeline for a Sodexo Magic.
we expect the Sodexo actually to be a simpler and so likely sooner than that. But yes.
Let me just see. So something has to happen next week in order for the council to act before September 30th, which then for both contracts, Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen, would continue them through the calendar year.
That's correct.
How much is Office of Contracting and Procurement being helpful?
I would say the office contracting procurement has been incredibly helpful. Nancy Hateman and I speak on a regular basis. We spoke earlier today about this contract. The contracting officer that has been working on these food service contracts is actually a detailed OCP employee. We have 3 detailed OCP employees who have been helping us be able to continue to strengthen our contracting process. And we have regular conversations with OCP leadership as required. We've also been taking part in OCP training. We've sent several of our employees to additional OCP training.
The detailees, how new are they to DCPS?
They came to us, I believe, in June for the 3 of them. One of them has done a previous stint at DCPS prior to this as well.
So the 3 predate you coming to DCPS?
Correct.
Give me just a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if you would respond. You don't have to respond right now, but maybe give us a response in writing to the testimony by Roscoe Grant and Kenneth Mackey with regard to the subcontracting at the CBEs.
Sure, we're happy to.
And so if you would provide that, and I'm going to recess this hearing to next Wednesday, the September 13th at 2:30. And I'm going to go through these same timeline questions.
Okay.
And I'm hopeful that between now and then, you will have had a conversation with the Attorney General, and between you all, you'll have some specific dates. That's all the questions I have, and I don't believe there are any other council members present. Thank you very much. So the time is 3:12, and this hearing is recessed until 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday, September 13th.